Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling. We are going out to Tempe, Arizona. It's no one on the Arizona State staff, but he's doing some great things with the NCAA. He's the weight management liaison for the NCAA and the NCAA secretary rules editor. He was at West Point as the Army coach up until 2010, three-time All-American for Oklahoma State. It's Chuck Barbee. How are you, Chuck?
Kyle, I'm doing great. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and excited to chat with you for a while.
I got to just know what these positions are because they sound pretty interesting, especially the NCAA Secretary Rules Editor. What does that mean?
Well, that position, I'm on the NCAA Wrestling Rules Committee. All right, I don't vote on the committee, but I'm a full member, and so that committee meets annually to look at the NCAA wrestling. We call them playing rules, even though I know wrestling doesn't like the word playing, but that's the term in NCAA. And we develop the rules, the committee develops the rules, and then in between those annual meetings, any question that can't be answered by directly reading the sentences in the rule book, in other words, they need an interpretation, I'm the official interpreter for college wrestling, right? So that means there's a single voice. It's very important that there be a single voice. I try to represent the committee's perspective and interest throughout the 12-month year, and I make interpretations. And the single voice really helps to ensure that we don't have people, say on the West Coast, saying, "Oh, we make the call this way," and then people on the East Coast say, "We make the call that way," or "This is the way I interpret it," or "I interpret it." With NCAA college wrestling, there's only one interpreter, and that's myself. And then I keep track of all of my interpretations in what we call a case book. And everybody can use this case book so that they know the exact interpretation nationally. So that's kind of the rules editor piece of it.
So are you a pretty popular guy during the season? Coaches calling you and saying, "Hey, this is what I thought it was," and wanting your interpretation?
I get a lot of emails. Yeah, I do get a lot of questions and calls. I mean, I work hand in hand with Tim Shields, our national coordinator of officials. He probably gets more calls just because his group of referees are the ones out there applying the interpretations that I make on the mat. So they're actually at the tip of the spear here. And so I'm kind of back on the spear some, but it's not like I'm immune to heat or criticism, but I'm certainly making my interpretations in the comfort of my home without screaming fans. And then these referees actually have to make them on the spot, which is very, very difficult. But what I try to give them is clarity and consistency, and so that they know that whatever call they make, if they follow the rule book and the case book, there's rules that will back them up on whatever call they make. All right. So that's kind of my goal, is to make it easy for them to know how it's supposed to be called, which in the end makes it more fair and makes a better outcome across the board from a national perspective.
What would your insight and interpretation be on the neutral danger zone, for example?
Yeah, the danger zone, it like a lot of rules changes, the rules committees over the past 5 or 6 years have really been innovative and creative about situations. The danger zone came out of a result of what everyone could see were tremendous scramble situations that often resulted in a very disappointing stalemate or something. And there was no way with our existing rules, for a wrestler to demonstrate control in those situations. Even though they oftentimes had control, it just didn't meet the traditional look of control. So we wanted to develop something so that wrestlers could innovate and develop tactics in these rolling and flipping and flopping situations to establish control and demonstrate it to the referee. And that's what the neutral danger is. It's another opportunity to score, and it looks different than a traditional takedown. But I think over time, you're going to continue to see people evolve it. And I think it's been really good overall.
On the out of bounds, that's always a question mark on what is stalling. You're going to have a call one way or the other, stalling on one guy or the other, or action call. That's a tough one. How do you interpret that?
Well, stalling, we all know stalling's been part of, calling stalling and the hands in the air. And that's just been part of our sport. It always put referees in a very difficult situation, and it was determined to be that it was extremely hard to bring any sort of national consistency to calling stalling. And so we couldn't tackle like the entirety of stalling, what we call traditional stalling now, like somebody's avoiding wrestling but staying in the circle. But what we could kind of tackle was these unnecessary stoppages that go out of bounds, which are a distraction, which actually favored, it was a rule set that favored maybe a wrestler who wasn't as well conditioned as one who was. So we wanted to just tackle the unnecessary stoppages in the neutral position. And so we constituted a mandatory decision by the referee. So that was very hard for the referees and very scary. There's no doubt about that. It was probably the single hardest rule I've been involved with to help interpret and implement. But I think now referees have kind of adapted to it. It's not perfect, and none of our rules are perfect at all. But I think no one can disagree that the number of stoppages in the neutral position are dramatically reduced. And now we have a rule that favors the well-conditioned athlete, because we're going to have a first period that maybe goes three minutes without a single stoppage, which is, I think, good for the sport and good for the wrestler. And it rewards, again, the tactical and well-conditioned athlete who can wrestle and stay in the center and out of bounds, or inbounds, I should say. And then referees, honestly, it just puts them on the spot. They've got to make a call. A lot of referees would just avoid a call. They would just kind of whistle it and come back to the center and not exactly sure what to do. But now you're forced to make a decision. And that's hard for the referees, but I think it's good for the sport overall.
To the letter of the law, I think if you're in a body lock, if you have a body lock and you run a guy out of bounds or walk him out of bounds, the guy with the body lock is technically stalling. Is that correct, and why is that?
Well, the rule says that no wrestler may force an unnecessary restart in the neutral position. So if I'm understanding your situation right, a person cannot, if you have any sort of hold, whether it be a collar tie or a body lock, and the wrestler is making an aggressive or semi-aggressive effort to stay in bounds, and you specifically do nothing but take them out of bounds, then you're forcing an unnecessary restart in that position. So that would be stalling. And so that's what the rule is. The rule is designed to keep people on the mat, to not force unnecessary restarts in the neutral position. And so that wrestler with the body lock has other tactics they can do. The other wrestlers try. Now, it's a different story if the wrestler makes no effort to circle in. If they just back out with minimal to no effort, then of course that's a stalling on the person backing out. But if you have someone aggressively trying to circle in and you do nothing but force to restart, then yeah, you're going to get called for stalling, out of bounds stalling by pushing.
Sometimes you'll hear people say that we're too complicated. We need to make it less complicated. From your vantage point, are we in a good space? Do we need to change some things one way or the other? How would you interpret where we are right now with rules?
Yeah, you hear that a lot. I mean, there's some validity to, keeping it simple. I mean, it's not just as easy as saying it's too complicated or it's too simple. I mean, our sport is our sport, and it's always it's going to be nuanced in the scoring. I think the end result, regardless of maybe how difficult it might be for the referees to learn the new rules and apply them, and how challenging it might be for coaches to look at the new rule tactics and adjust their coaching accordingly, that all is secondary to the fact that hopefully the rules provide a better quality match for everyone to watch. And it results in a match that can be executed fairly across a national audience. So I think from that perspective, we're in a good space. And we always will look and have work to do. Wouldn't claim that we have arrived or perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think if you compare us to, I'm just going to use the term X number of years ago, there was, when people were dropping down on ankles and figuring out the ride out was like a matrix of trying to figure out, how to call stalling or stalemate, and all the restarts, matches taking 10, 11 minutes, having 5, 10, 15 restarts. I think we're in a much better place from there. And I think the fans, I mean, while the referees have more to do and the coaches have more to think about, I think the fans can still appreciate the aggressiveness and the scoring the takedowns. And there's going to be something to learn to be able to fully appreciate it. But I think we have a good product that's enjoyable to watch.
What do you think a step out would do to the sport if you had a 1-point step out?
Personally, I'm gonna, again, I'll say I'm speaking personally here, and I'm not speaking as the Rules Committee representative, although I could do that as well. But the communications on the step out are that it's really, again, not cut and dry and so simple. People think the panacea is the step out. Well, then when you have a step out, then you have all the qualitative decision making that has to occur as far as who stepped out first and who did all of this. And that really becomes more of a push out rule rather than what we have now, which is stay on the mat. And I think freestyle wrestling proved that. They've gone full circle and are very, very close to almost what we have now with the stay on the mat rule, as far as there being penalties for forcing an unnecessary restart. So I personally don't like the idea of a push out. Our rules committee has deliberated it exhaustively and have come to the same conclusions to date. That doesn't mean that can't change. But I think allowing the referees this last rule cycle, we minimized the number of new rules purposefully so that we could allow the referees time to get even better and better, and allow Tim Shields to train them even better and better on how to call the existing rule set. That I think right now our class of officials are unbelievably talented and good. I think we have some amazing officials, and they've been allowed the time to I should say, to enhance their ability to call the rule set. And I think they do a good job of it. So I would be against the push out myself.
I know someone I don't know where he stands on it now, but I think he's thrown it out at some point. Was John Smith said maybe a 3-point takedown. What would you think about that?
I mean, I'm always open to that. I mean, I think the Rules Committee has demonstrated, and again, I'm speaking as the Rules Editor, someone on the committee who has feedback, but no vote on that. I think I would never say there's not value in looking at a 3-point takedown. I mean, making that differential between the oftentimes 1 point, unearned 1 point versus the 2-point takedown with a net of 1 is kind of challenging. It's worth thinking about. The takedown is very important in our sport. And I think you saw what the 4-point near fall did for turning, which was good. And we put the 4-point near fall in tactically after we had wrestlers for a long time were used to dropping down and hanging on and side headlocks and doing all these things. And we took all that away from them. So we wanted to make sure that we still encouraged being on top, but turning, not dropping down on ankles and legs and waist and ankles and side headlocks and just grasping and clawing, but actually turning. And I think that worked out really well. I think a 3-point takedown could do something positive. And I know our rules committee would definitely deliberate it and has deliberated it. Didn't feel the time was right in the last rule cycle, but you never know. You never know moving forward. I think it's definitely a quality thing to deliberate about.
Technical falls are part of the sport, and would just love to get your insight on that. You have a situation where, take a Spencer Lee, a lot of his matches don't go past the first period, so you have a superstar, you get to see him for less than 3 minutes, and then some of our matches that are 1-1 go 12, 15 minutes, way beyond what they probably should at times. Does it seem counterintuitive to have the best wrestlers wrestling less than maybe some of the wrestlers that aren't as exciting to watch?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, maybe we should have a mercy rule, like if it's 1-1 after 2 periods, you just go sit on the bench. I don't know. So you got to do more. You just get kicked out. But no, that has not been under consideration. But no, it's a good point. I think the rules committee has looked at rules, and I don't personally think, I can't speak to the wrestlers that go 1-1 and 10, 12 minutes. in a lot of ways. That's always going to happen to some extent with some wrestlers, but ultimately, I think that's somewhat a product of coaching philosophies as well. And I think our coaches need to embrace this concept of risk and getting out there and focus on scoring points. And we're not going to be universally in that space, I don't believe. But if we have a lot of people just looking at tactically how to keep it close and win, and we have to have rule sets that discourage that sort of coaching philosophy. And maybe we haven't cracked that, obviously, 100% just yet. But those particular areas, I'm going to kind of push back on the coaching world to try to break out of that on a big picture, on a team-wide scale, because we all know we're going to occasionally have a tight match. But we also know that if you take risk, you're going to earn points and you're going to give up points. As far as getting off the mat quickly, I think our season is very long. And I think maybe the 4-point near fall has made the achieving a technical fall quicker, much more practical. Before, if you can imagine, it was the amount of energy you had to expend to take them down, let them up, or to get to a technical fall. Honestly, it's hardly worth the effort to do. Just from like if you're in a tournament and you want your athletes, I mean, you want the team points, but that amount of energy is substantial. So we see, with implementing daily match limits, mandatory rest times, the ability to end a match sooner, those things are actually good for the health and welfare of the student athlete and getting them healthy through the season and helping individual matches to be more exciting throughout the season and helping to have our best quality and healthy athletes available at our championship at the end. So we'll work on the 1-1s, but I think ending matches quickly, I don't see that as being a bad thing for us.
Is writing time here to stay?
Well, it's still here. So I guess if I knew that, I would definitely know something, wouldn't I? It's here for another couple of years. I can't be on. It's always a topic of discussion. So that's a difficult one. Yeah, there's a lot of, you have to not only think what a person doesn't like about writing time or what a person does like, but when you get rid of something like that that's been in the sport for so long, you really have to go first, second, third, fourth level down in thinking to try to think, what's that going to do potentially? And we can all pop off a few things. Oh, it's going to do this, this, and this. But the reality of it is it's very complex. And the Rules Committee has always been reticent to adopt that. And it's always been a point of discussion. It's, to be honest, never had extremely strong traction in regards to getting rid of it. So just from my perspective, I don't see anything on the horizon about it going away. But we meet every 2 years to look at rules, and our Rules Committee has proven that they are willing to do what is needed to continue to evolve and improve the sport and not to be stagnant, not to be stuck in old ways of thinking or wrestling. And so I feel confident that if the time ever comes, the Rules Committee will address it, and we'll make sure if it ever does change, it'll be a good change.
Why not go the other way? Give a point for every minute and just get up, maybe you get up to 6 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that, I mean, it definitely, that some people probably cringe when you say that. So, but yeah, I mean, those things are the kind of things we think about, that's, just off the top of my head, awarding additional points is not going to be a rule that necessarily puts a lot more points on the board. So, that one would be probably even tougher sell than getting rid of writing time. But if there was a sound rationale and a good projection strategically for the sport, everything's on the table.
What's the most difficult situation to interpret?
Well, I mean, all the rules, our Rules Committee works very hard. We try to write the rules so that there's not a lot of gray area around them, but that almost never happens. I think the biggest thing is the rules that relate to wrestlers on the mat and rules that are punitive are always difficult. And with punitive rules, we're talking match point deductions, team point deductions, flagrant misconducts, unnecessary roughness. Those are all difficult because they're a punitive action. We don't have a ton of ways that we can punitively address actions on our teams or our coaching staffs or our wrestlers. And so those are always very difficult. And there's been lots of talk about getting rid of this team point deduction or this match point deduction. But the reality is we have to have some way, and it's very difficult to find alternative ways in these spaces. The end result is we have what we have, and I try to, as an interpreter, we interpret that even though it kind of hurts to apply these penalties sometimes, if we do it uniformly by the rules or by the interpretations across the board nationally, then we can know we're doing our wrestlers and our teams a service. We do it fairly. There's no subjectivity as far as anything goes. It's objective as possible. But those are probably the most difficult ones.
It's interesting in wrestling that team points can be deducted, where in football that doesn't happen, basketball doesn't happen. Why does it happen in wrestling? Why is it necessary to deduct team points, especially when they're so hard to get?
Excuse me. Yeah, it just goes back to there's certain negative behaviors that are expressed that are really unacceptable in the eyes of the Rules Committee or the NCAA, and even in your local university administrations. There's just behaviors that are not okay for the safety of the sport, for the look of the sport. And so whether we like it or not, people engage in those negative behaviors. They do that, and it's detrimental to themselves, to their universities, to their communities, oftentimes, depending on the severity, obviously. It's not good for the look of the sport. So we have to have some way to sanction those individuals. And right now, that's the only way we have. It's not like the Rules Committee is not exploring options for that, but it is a very difficult thing when you really dive into it. And most people that look at rules, they look at them very superficially. And there's, for everyone's like, oh, this is X is Y, this makes absolute sense. Then there's also a Y and a Z, why it may not make sense, but we don't ever go down those roads on Twitter and in just casual conversations. So the answer is we don't have any other better, and not just better, but fair way to do it. And so that's basically why we have that right now.
You're also weight management liaison. Dive into that position and what that means.
That's a very important position in my estimation. We've distanced ourselves from the unfortunate by time deaths of the several wrestlers that we had pass away by weight cutting, poor practices, and so NCAA college wrestling has a very good weight management system, and this system helps athletic trainers to certify individuals, and it's really kind of a gold standard. I mean, the places, the UFCs and the MMAs and all those different areas, hopefully now women's wrestling will adopt a lot of our same weight management practices. They have made the sport much safer. I think they've improved the quality of the experience for the wrestlers. It's removed a lot of very negative coach to wrestler interactions as far as selecting a weight class that used to occur in the 70s, 80s, 90s when we're trying to decide the best weight class to go. And so my job is to kind of oversee that, make sure it runs consistently from year to year. And then in the unfortunate times when we have people that violate rules, maybe they use some plastics, or they use diuretics, or they try to cheat on a urine analysis for specific gravity for hydration. We have very, very severe penalties for that, and we apply them without hesitation, because it's that important that we all continue to embrace this and be leaders in that space.
Is 1 hour enough time before weigh-ins? Do you think it should double and maybe be 2 hours?
There's certainly a case for that. The Rules Committee had brought that out last year as a possibility. I've always said, this is from a weight management person and a fan of the sport and a former coach and a former wrestler, that the single greatest deterrent to losing excessive weight is the time between weigh-ins and competition. It supersedes every other aspect that we have, including the entire certification process, because, and the reason why, is because it helps make weight cutting not a competitive advantage. So every minute that we creep backwards, we get a little closer to making it more advantageous for a wrestler to lose weight, knowing that they have time to recover and feel good. Now, I'm not saying 2 hours is that point. There's a fine line where's the balance. And our rules committee has recommended 2 hours in the past, and it got denied by I forget the NSA committee, but it was denied by I believe the Health and Safety Committee from moving forward. So the Rules Committee has looked at that, but our Health and Safety Committees, when I say our, I'm talking about the NCAA, our Playing Rules Oversight Panel, which is also the NCAA, they're concerned with weight cutting not being a competitive advantage, and that's what the hour weigh-in. I will say, from a coach and wrestler, it's tight. It's a tight time frame for sure. But I will also say that when you're coaching someone and you're counseling them on what weight to possibly select, you think about that. You know, you think about, like, oh, if you go to that weight, you're going to feel horrible. You're not going to be able to win. You're not going to be able to wrestle to your full potential. And so it does result in coaches and wrestlers deciding maybe it's not worth going down to that weight class. And that's not a bad thing for the sport at all. When I was at West Point, I think I counseled more wrestlers to move up a weight than I ever did down, because the rules support that. You can be competitive and wrestling at a more natural weight. If we explore too far away weigh-ins to match time, it gets a little more gray. So that's the big concern.
Are the deaths from 1997-98 that caused all this change to move up 7 pounds and then the 1 hour weigh-in, is that still fresh in your mind as you make decisions?
I try to keep it fresh in my mind, and we have people on our committee that keeps that fresh as well. And you can probably remember back, Kyle, and I do, back in that time period, and even long before that time, basically from that time period throughout previous history that I'm aware of, it was a very negative cycle, the way our wrestlers got down to weight. I mean, we have a lot of people my age and even people younger than me who, you know, they like to hearken back to those days and speak lightly of them, but they're really bad days. They're really not good. We really shouldn't kind of embellish and talk about these old school weight cutting tactics and I lost this. It's really not a good look for our sport, and it's really not a place we'll ever go back to. So I think we need to continue to embrace letting wrestlers compete at weight classes where they're fit. Okay, they're elite athletes, and they're very fit and they're very lean. But we all know the point between lean and then going down 10, 15 more pounds below that. That's what we can never go back to.
Tell us maybe one thing about weight management that we don't know about. It's just things that happen in managing your weight that happens that the general public might not know.
Well, I think that what they may not know is every NCAA college has a medical personnel that is really taking this on and being really diligent and ethical and really professional in how they execute these assessments. They're doing specific gravity tests in labs. They're doing skin fold measurements. They're weighing them in. Sometimes they have to get up super early in the morning to do it. Our athletic trainers are the unsung heroes in the weight management system. And they're inputting the data. They're counseling wrestlers on how to be hydrated and how to use their weight loss descent plan. So I don't know if the average public person knows how much the athletic training staff do in this system, but they're absolutely critical.